Hi, and welcome
to the Faxon blog and podcast. Yeah, so, I think it's funny. We did we did our talk back in March, and just how stuff has progressed has been quite interesting.
World's changed a little bit.
Hi, and welcome to episode 24 of the Faxon blog and podcast. Today we have a great guest. Dan Zimmerman is going to be back on with us. If you remember, Dan joined us for the Gun Run pandemic episode back in March, where our main topic of conversation was about all of the things that were happening in the spike in gun sales throughout the country in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, a lot of stuff has happened since then. And if you're familiar with The Truth About Guns, they are putting out content all the time that follows all of this, plus general 2A community things, as well as gun reviews and so on. We're going to mention a couple of their articles in the episode today and give you all of the links at faxonfirearms.com/blog on this episode page. Before we carry on today, I do want to remind you that just this week, we launched a new way that you could interact with the podcast. We'd love to answer some crowd questions, take your insights, comments, feedback, maybe even ideas for guests and topics. We'd love to hear it. You could email us at podcast@faxonfirearms.com, and we'd love to have you as part of the show. One of the things we try to do on the podcast is make sure that we are making content that people of all ages in the gun community can enjoy together, be it as a family or just as an enthusiast. We do want to give you a heads up today that we are going to be talking about some of the protest rioting, some of the civil unrest things that are happening. So if you want to scroll through the blog first before you watch the video or listen to the audio, you are more than welcome to do that. Again, you can find that at faxonfirearms.com/blog. Nothing explicit, but just want to give you a heads up for that. And let's carry on with our conversation with Dan. Well, Dan, thank you again for joining us. This is your second time on the show, so a little bit of a glutton for punishment, but I appreciate you being here. You guys, yourself, all your contributors always seem to have just lots of content and a really good pulse on kind of what's going on, in the firearms community. But for those folks who maybe don't know you or might be hearing about The Truth About Guns for the first time, if you wouldn't mind just telling the folks who you are and kind of what TTAG is all about.
Sure. We are one of the largest gun blogs on the internet. We're up there, number 1, number 2, number 3, depending on time of year, what's going on. So, seem to shuffle around that title occasionally with a couple of other blogs out there. And we cover everything having to do with guns, politics, gun control. We review guns. We write about gun news. And we've certainly been involved in the discussion about the civil unrest that's gone on in recent months and the surge in violence of all types, but violence involving firearms, of course, too, in cities around the country. And we have about 1.5 million to 1.7 million readers a month. If you've ever been to our site, we've got a very engaged readership. Our comment section gets pretty wild and woolly sometimes. So
yeah, and the nice thing is, one of the things I love about your site is there's new stuff every day, and it's not just like one thing. It's multiple things, multiple contributors, yourself included. What I'd love to start with, though, is, we were talking before we started recording today that when you were back on with us in March, this was just at the beginning of the whole COVID pandemic. Places were just starting to lock down. We were literally getting calls right before we started recording that first episode from dealers like, send us everything you got. We had sales guys helping local stores, because they just couldn't even staff enough people to get in there. And obviously we've seen now, more background checks for firearms come through this year than any time in known history, really. What has been, your perception, and from the folks you've talked to, how are these gun stores doing? How are these, suppliers doing? obviously we're in the same boat as a lot of them, keeping things in stock and satisfying dealer back orders is, quite the task right now with this run. But kind of what are you seeing on your side, and what do you think has changed since our conversation in March?
Well, I think it's the same thing. For a while there, things tended to we're starting to calm down. There was the initial surge of buying after the national emergency was declared. And then the whole Minneapolis thing hit. And the initial anger, I think, that everybody felt at what happened to George Floyd changed into civil unrest nationwide, with police officers doing nothing about it. I mean, they were actively held back, and people were allowed to riot and loot, and there was all sorts of general lawlessness. So a lot of what people were concerned about when they started buying their firearms so heavily in March, they're worried about police being sick and not being able to keep up with, keep enough cops on the street. People were worried about that, but then you threw on top of it the general civil unrest situation, and what we've seen in a number of cities nationwide, and now with the defund the police movement,
right?
That's only fueled the fire of demand for all things gun, as I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah.
Gun stores just can't seem to keep their shelves stocked. They sell everything they can possibly get their hands on. Ammunition is very difficult to get a hold of. If you're a reloader, that's starting to get very difficult. I understand that primers are extremely difficult to access right now. It seems like the makers of primers are probably using everything they can get to make cartridges. Winchester and Federal are the two big primer makers in the country. And I think they're using most of what they manufacture in terms of primers to make ammunition. I'm sure some on as components, but even the reloaders are having difficulty now getting components.
And when we first talked back in March, and we weren't the only ones who saw this type of commentary, but there were a lot of people like, all these first time gun buyers, I can't wait till this summer when they all show up in pawn shops. And my goodness, it has not happened.
No.
In the slightest bit. And if anything, it's increased. I mean, I think it was just this week, everybody got their official data about gun sales in 2018. And then if we just look in our interior sales, in 2019 versus 2020, I mean, it's everything. It's not just full firearms for us. It's parts, it's accessories. I mean, it's everything. And even some of our, outside folks, we do some work with American Outdoor Brands, Crimson Trace and those guys, and even they have some trouble keeping up with things. Wheeler, Tipton, gun cleaning supplies,
yes.
They're having trouble keeping up, which in one respect you go, okay, well, here we go. We're kind of ushering in this new community and there's more people coming. And I don't say this tongue in cheek. It is sad that it's had to come to this to get people, more people from the outskirts kind of into the community, but we're definitely not seeing that initial decline that everybody was saying, wait 2-3 months and all this stuff's going to be in a pawn shop. That's just not happened at all.
No, and I don't have any expectation that that's going to happen. I also don't have any expectation that the demand is going to reduce much, if at all, between now and November.
Right.
With the uncertainty about the national uncertainty as to what the outcome of the election is going to be, and if it goes one way, you're going to have a push for more gun control. If it goes the other way, I have a lot of people expect that you could see more rioting and more unrest,
absolutely,
more burning, more looting. So there's no incentive there for people to stop stocking up anytime soon. I just don't see it. I think people are going to continue to buy all the ammunition. Certainly ammunition. they can get their hands on. At some point, I guess you would reach a saturation level on firearms, but we aren't anywhere close to that. I mean, you figure the official number that people throw around is 100 million gun owners. That was before the surge. Supposedly there are anywhere 5-8 million new gun owners that have been added since. There's a lot of headroom still there, and a lot of people. You still read accounts of people who never thought they would ever buy a firearm, and they never wanted a gun. They never wanted to even think about having a gun. They're buying guns now, you hear these stories over and over again. We've run some of them on our site, and if you spend any time on social media, you see them. People who were frequently middle of the roaders and just never even considered it. Sometimes people even who are actively anti-gun, but they see what's happening and they want the ability to protect themselves, to protect their families. And, in one way, that's certainly good for the gun rights movement, I suppose. And there's a lot of speculation as to how those people will behave down the road. Will their new gun ownership affect how they vote, how they value their Second Amendment rights? That remains to be seen.
Yeah. And I think too, part of it that comes to mind for me is back when we did our original first episode of the podcast in February, my friend John, who's one of our sales folks here, he and I did the show for the first time, and we were talking about, if you look at pretty much any data about feelings towards gun ownership, obviously pre-2020, there were a lot of folks who they weren't opposed to it. They just didn't happen to own one. And it was right. either like a felt need thing, or it was, I didn't really grow up with one, or I feel pretty safe, so there were a lot, and it really covered both sides of the political spectrum, with the largest swath of that being people who don't, sway to one side or the other. They're legitimately middle of the road, not saying they're independent or libertarian, but people who don't necessarily subscribe to the two-party system, or who aren't diehard, one way or the other. It was just a lot of felt need. I might buy one in the future, but I don't know. I just don't feel the need for one right now. And obviously that felt need has increased.
Right. These are the people in, the great middle, the people who sway elections, the people who are busy living their lives, and who, they go to work and they're busy with their kids, and, they've got other considerations, and it was never anywhere high on their priority list.
Yeah.
But when they see what they've seen on their TVs the last 6-8 weeks, they see lawlessness. They see, businesses being destroyed. They see cities burning. In areas, or if, and we've heard from minority people too, there are minority people who feel concerned, whether it's justifiable or not. The narrative is out there that police are, while the data isn't there, the narrative has been sold that police are being violent with, or disproportionately violent with minority people.
Sure.
And those people are buying firearms too.
Right.
So there's a variety of motivations among people who never thought before that they would own firearms, and they're doing it.
Yeah. And I think, especially when we're talking about the fact that, I personally feel, and I don't necessarily speak on behalf of Faxon on this, is my personal feeling, is just, especially when the police feel like they're hamstrung. If I'm a native of Columbus, I live here in Cincinnati now, but I still follow a lot of Columbus news. And so they had the 1-2 punch of, well, you're Columbus, you're named after Christopher Columbus, and all those statues and things are coming down and riots in front of the State House. And, one of the things that happened just a couple of weeks ago, I believe CPD had a lieutenant out that had to report on it. But, there were folks that, on Father's Day weekend protesting in front of the State House, and the police are just asking them, hey, stay on the sidewalk because you're on a crazy busy thorough street. And, someone chucked a rental scooter at a couple of cops, and this was after they were told, hey, police, don't wear your riot gear anymore. Don't deploy, tear gas or whatever, all those different things where they really wanted to step it, they wanted to try to, like you were saying, step the narrative down a notch and step the optics down a notch. Because a lot of people, they just see police in riot gear and they assume the worst, they assume it's RoboCop or something, it's right. Not, not necessarily thinking of their protection. And I don't think there's really anybody left in any of these conversations that doesn't go, yes, there have been police in the past that have done things they shouldn't have done.
Of course.
And I don't think anybody's arguing that point, but it's the narrative that gets pushed forward. And for those who are trying to protect, they get thrown under the bus as well. And it hits home for me personally. I have family members and close friends who are police officers and have been for a long time. And so, again, knowing I'm not from a minority group, I can't speak to that, but it's still, it puts a little bit of a tinge on you when you see like, gosh, like these guys aren't even able to wear the things that are supposed to protect them, in these situations simply because of the optics of the situation.
No, exactly. And among any population in any group, you're going to get a minority of people, a minority that is bad. You're going to get the cops. There's some bad cops in any group. The vast majority of them want to do their job, want to protect the citizenry, and do it the best way they can. The narrative that they're out there as a racist white supremacist force in order to oppress the country's minorities is a lie. It's not borne out by the statistics, and it's not borne out by facts. But facts don't seem to matter much anymore. That narrative is being sold by a lot of people, many of whom are in the media. We had the example last week or the week before of a couple of researchers who did a significant amount of analysis of fatal police-involved shootings to see if minorities were overrepresented or among the victims. And they found out that they were not. This was something that was published back in 2019. Now, given the current situation, people were starting to cite their work, and those academics were being attacked because their results and their data countered the narrative. And as a result, they pulled that back and disavowed their own research.
There's a lot of social pressure and sidestepping right now.
Yeah.
In a lot of regards, I think one of the things that we've seen, whether it be, like you said, whether it be, gun data research to, brand mascots and spokespeople, and football teams included. It's just like, okay, it's hot right now and I don't want to fall. And at the end of the day, if I'm just thinking business, I don't necessarily blame those people. If you think that you are next, like if Land O'Lakes thought they were next, or Aunt Jemima thought they were next, or, the Washington Redskins thought they were next, whether it's born out of integrity and them actually saying, you know what, we don't think this is right anymore, or it's being born out of, oh my goodness, we've kind of been under the microscope for this before, and now it's a really, really hot time. It's time to, expedite those decisions. I think it is. I think a lot of people are just feeling the pressure, and they don't want to be, the first ones or the next ones rather, to fall because of it.
No, no business owner wants to be the target. And the trouble is, once these things start, they don't stop. We saw this during the French Revolution, and we saw it, and we are seeing it now. Initially they were just after the Confederate statues because these were slave owners and these were traitors to the United States who fought against the Union. Now we're down to pulling down statues of Frederick Douglass. We're down to pulling down statues. People that are talking about pulling down statues of President Lincoln, who freed the slaves. There was a statue of a moose burned in Portland. I'm not sure what the justification was there. So once it starts, these things are difficult to stop. And it's hard to get these things under control.
Well, let's kind of take a little bit of a trip down that road as it comes to, the gun ownership and how people are protecting themselves and kind of, responding to this. I mean, we've already established that, there's concerns. Originally, there were concerns with the pandemic. Now there's concerns with defunding of the police and also police feeling hamstrung. I mean, I'm sure you saw the same, video of that, that day after in Atlanta, where dispatch was calling out and nobody was responding.
Yeah.
It's scary, and there are innocent people who want and need, to protect themselves. The thing that, I knew that you were pretty in tune on when we last talked was some of the kind of wait times and things that were happening, especially in places like Chicago, who, some of these cities and states that have some of the strictest gun laws in the country. What have you seen has been happening in those places? Because from, a layman over here who's just a marketing guy, I see a lot of stuff where it's like, it seems like the violent crime uptick in Minneapolis, in Chicago, in these kind of metro areas where especially police are under the microscope, that it's really, if anything, has gotten worse.
That's what we're seeing too. And it's the cities with the biggest upticks in violence that are the first ones to get on the defund the police bandwagon. So that's why you've seen New York City cut $1 billion out of the NYPD's budget. You've seen it in Seattle. You've seen it in Oakland. You've seen it in Chicago, San Francisco, San Diego. It's happening everywhere. It happened in Norman, Oklahoma. I just read this morning. And there's now a move to recall the city council and the mayor because of that. So it's happening all over the place. And this is what people are seeing. And this is part of the motivation behind so many people making sure that they have the tool to defend themselves, because they can't rely on the police being there or certainly or getting there. And it's always been the case. As we've been preaching for years and years, you are your own first responder.
Right.
In the best of times, how fast could a cop get there? 5 minutes. That was world class. That was state of the art response time. And that was in just a few instances. Bigger cities, it's usually 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes. I have to believe that's significantly higher now, given what they're dealing with on the streets, given the fact that there are fewer cops on the streets in a lot of places. And if they're not, they're going to be fewer soon as these budgets are cut and resources are funneled to violence interrupters, community organizers, and other utopian methods that are going to be tried to reduce violence in the streets.
I think one of the places that, there's a lot of people who think that everything happening in Seattle with CHOP or CHAZ or whatever the acronym is now, is almost like a social experiment, that it is kind of a planned thing. It's like, okay, we'll back out and let's see how this works out for you. A couple of weeks ago, we had Rugi on, who was the the former Marine who, disarmed the folks that were taking the rifles out of the cruisers and everything and made the news for that. And even he said, he goes, I was there. There were a ton of police there and they started backing out. And so that I think is going to be the microcosm that everybody looks at and goes, okay, like you want to try it, you want to annex, you want to have police. And, the thing I don't understand still is like how you still getting utilities and things like that. But, like how is that going to work out? What does that really look like? And then obviously we've seen the reports of violence in those places and the dangers that are in those places. Do you think that how do you think that Seattle, a place like Seattle, a place like Washington might respond after this gets cleared up? Because I don't know if I see it staying an autonomous zone after the election, regardless of who wins out.
No, I mean, obviously they cleared out the CHOP. The choppers, the Chopinistas made the mistake of actually marching on the mayor's home. And as supportive and as coddling as she was, that was a step too far. Therefore, they had to clear it out. The fact that we were getting shootings there every other day or so, and a few bodies and the wounded were starting to pile up, so it was becoming a true national embarrassment. Let alone whatever other crimes were probably taking place there that we will never even hear about.
For sure.
She felt the pressure. I'm sure she was getting a huge amount of political pressure behind the scenes too from the powers that be in Seattle. It was a huge embarrassment for the city, and it was a festering sore in the face of a beautiful city.
Oh yeah.
But it's also a city that has been very accommodating to the people who are sympathetic to CHOP, to the defund the police movement, to the Black Lives Matter movement, and people who, and you saw the result. You're absolutely right. It was a wonderful little experiment. It's too bad people had to be shot and people had to die during that experiment.
Right.
But it was an experiment nonetheless, and we see how that turned out.
Yeah, I mean, it's just literally okay. You think this is ideal? Well, here it is. I mean, like at some point, like, we'll just be, here eating lunch or something. And, and obviously we talk about this sort of stuff and we're just like, did you give up your citizenship? Did you like what?
Yeah.
I mean, at what point is it just like, gosh, like this isn't, you can't be like the kid who runs away from home, right? And you just pack up your suitcase with the toys you think you want to play with for the next day. Like this could have serious repercussions for you, regardless of your immediate safety. Like, what does that mean for you going forward? What does that mean for you in 5 years if it gets cleared up on a job application? Hey, we noticed for like 6 months, were you out of the country? Were you, what is this? We're always worried about gap in employment. What about a gap in citizenship? Like how does that even work?
There was a lot of long range perspective that went into the thinking behind CHOP and all that.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting that the people who are sympathetic to CHOP and sympathetic to the whole defund the police movement are some of the first people who called for the police during when something bad happens. This happened just a couple of days ago in South Carolina at the Capitol. There were some marchers in front of the Capitol because I think it was the 5-year anniversary of them removing the Confederate flag from the Capitol dome or something like that. And we wrote about this, and a man drove up and got into an argument with these people and displayed a gun. Stupidly pointed a gun at these people. And this was all caught on video. And the first thing these marchers did was say, officer, he's got a gun.
Yeah.
These are the same people who are calling for police to be defunded, disbanded, eliminated. Right. Who are they going to call down the road if they're successful and something like that happens again? Again, I don't think a lot of long range thinking goes into these these plans of theirs.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing that I think is important to note is that I truly don't believe that the boundaries on those movements and on those thoughts are limited to one side of the aisle or the other, even though it may skew one way. I mean, this has really found kind of a different polarization in the community, in the U.S. in general. So I just want to be clear, just for our watchers and listeners. I mean, I'm not necessarily an apologist, but the fact of the matter is, like, hey, there's people on both sides of this argument that straddle the political divide, that ride either side of the political divide. This has become, I think, way more than political because, like you said, it's about narrative. This isn't about a campaign, a stumping post. This isn't about what platform, does your party run on. This is about social perception. And in the age that we live in, it's no longer about giving somebody the truth. It's about having to debunk what they originally thought was the truth. Before all, the facts and things get out. That does not mean that people like us don't agree that there are definitely problems. There are absolutely problems in the community.
Unquestionably.
There's folks, like you said, there are folks, in policing that, have made terrible decisions or maybe shouldn't be there. There's people clearly in politics that have done the same, and in any walk of life. But what you brought up, though, was, about the folks in South Carolina and seeing someone, pull a weapon. I would be remiss if I didn't ask about your take on everything that happened in St. Louis with the couple that then became kind of infamous overnight. It was like that. And all of a sudden I'm seeing, custom Cerakote and laser shops, putting silhouettes of these people in their Ralph Lauren and khakis, on pistol frames. What do you what were your insights on that? And secondly, I think people like me, you get scared because you see people, gun owners with regular licensed registered firearms are getting their homes raided. What are the what have you heard about that? And are there any layers you could pull away from it?
Well, I'm from St. Louis and I know that area really well. I know that specific neighborhood. And as soon as I saw the video, I knew exactly where that happened.
Oh, geez.
I've been in that neighborhood. I've been in homes in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
St. Louis has a unique structure in that is what's known as a private neighborhood. And under Missouri law, you're not even allowed to walk through there, drive through there without the invitation of a resident. So those people were truly trespassing. And both of the McCloskeys can be criticized for their gun handling, their safety.
Sure. Yeah.
Mrs. McCloskey in particular stood there and, muzzled people directly, pointed the gun continually with her finger on the trigger. It was a gun safety nightmare. That said, if you were one of those two people and seeing what you'd seen in St. Louis and every other big city in the country over the last few weeks, and all of a sudden a large crowd of people breaks down a gate and enters your neighborhood, and they are literally the first house you come to through the gate off Kings Highway through where those people entered the neighborhood, you'd be concerned too, because you didn't know where that they were headed for the mayor's home. You didn't know what they had planned. So they were on, while the situation in Charleston or in South Carolina at the Capitol was one thing, where a person went out of their way and displayed a gun at people. Sure. Somebody were arguing. That was stupid. These people, however, were on their own property, were defending their own home. And it was reported by a number of outlets that some of the marchers, in response to seeing these two people with firearms in front of their home, they got into it verbally. They threatened to burn the house. They threatened to kill their dog, that type of thing. So I'm generally supportive of what they tried to do. I'm not necessarily supportive of how they tried to do it. It'd be nice if they handle their guns more safely. But they were defending their home. and they have every right to do so. And those people were trespassing in the neighborhood.
And how would you rate kind of how St. Louis is as far as gun ownership and gun laws in general? I mean, are they kind of more on the, the side of where it's generally a norm and it's relatively, non-cumbersome, or is it more of like a Chicago situation?
No. Missouri has wonderful gun laws. Missouri is a constitutional carry state now, and they have preemption. So the city of St. Louis or Kansas City can't enact any laws that are more restrictive than the state level. I live in Texas now, but Missouri has better gun laws than we do here. So
that almost seems mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It's
very good.
Yeah.
What was disturbing then was, of course, you've got a highly politicized prosecutor in St. Louis who, after the rioting in the city, she let all the rioters and looters go without charges. She didn't prosecute any of it. In this case, however, she stepped in right away. So we saw the St. Louis police execute a warrant the other day and seize the rifle that Mr. McCloskey used. And I won't be at all surprised to see that if she files charges against them as well.
I mean, what was the certification of the warrant? Do we know that? Do we know, was it just because they brandished a weapon, or was it because, or did they find some other thing?
I think it was part of the investigation. I think it was a sop to the community on the part of Kim Gardner, the prosecuting attorney. So she wanted to show that she's doing something, even if she chooses at some point not to bring charges. And I think it was probably an intimidation factor as well. Gardner has all kinds of problems. She's not popular. The city's police did not like working with her. She's had over 100% turnover in her department in terms of all the attorneys who work in her office. So I've kept a pretty close eye on what happens in St. Louis, because I still have a lot of family there. And she's one of the worst prosecutors in the U.S. She's up there with Kim Fox in Chicago. It's not a good situation. So you don't want to be in her sights. And the McCloskeys are squarely in her sights these days.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think if we could take away, anything from our conversation right now, the big deal is that, like, listen, just because you're a gun company or a gun blog or whatever, doesn't mean that you agree with everything that, gun owners are doing, or how how they handled the situation. There's a lot of, lumping in of stereotypes, the same way we're seeing, with police, the same way that we're seeing, with folks and the BLM movement. I think there are some folks who really maybe aren't quite as extremist as it gets painted, but obviously who gets highlighted. And the same thing with, the other folks in these communities that, feel some sort of call to be like, well, I feel like it's my civil duty to be part of these protests, or, I knew someone who XYZ, there's just so much social pressure on it right now. And I mean, it is such a perfect storm. I know that, conspiracy theorists are having a heyday with 2020. I mean, with just COVID hitting and then all the civil unrest and everything that has happened in the wake of the issues in Minneapolis and Atlanta. And then on top of that, you have an election year, and it's one of the, the most palpably tense ones, that we've ever seen. And I just think that we need to understand that even in the gun community, there are nuances, and there are going to be differences of opinions of how people deal with things, how people address their Second Amendment rights, how people, decide, what political causes and things that they're going to support. We don't all belong on the other side of the populist narrative right now. I hope that people can see that.
You can't pigeonhole people that way. Yeah. People aren't that easily quantifiable, classifiable. It can't be folded, spindled, and mutilated that easily. They have different things that matter to them. Not every gun owner is a single issue voter. There are other things that they care about besides the Second Amendment. They may care about certainly about the economy. They may care about foreign policy, and they care about abortion. Everything under the sun. Yeah. So everybody thinks that every gun owner in this country is an old fat white guy who belongs to the NRA and
and assumes that they buy it all. Yeah, that they buy it all hook, line, and sinker.
Right.
That it's going
and
to
that
be that whole thing.
Isn't the case.
I think it's funny. Our friends over at Pew Pew Tactical put out an article earlier this week just highlighting, hey, here's some celebrities you may not know are actually gun owners and kind of 2A activists, and that's always an interesting one to look at. And sure. Some of the ones that I think people forget about are like Whoopi Goldberg. I'm pretty sure she was or is a member of the NRA, which that'll, blow the minds of a lot of people, but even down to, even today, we were talking to some other folks about a project like guys like in the younger generations, like, the Post Malones of the world, are 2A activists and or at least 2A supporters. And so I think there's a lot of things that you can't necessarily pigeonhole unless you two want to be hypocritical about, people taking stances on different social issues. This is just going to be, it's just going to continue to evolve, especially if the folks who are new to this community because of the pandemic, because of the social unrest or what have you, they're going to, melting pot this community even more than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, I think it's true. We've always taken the opinion guns are for everybody. If you want to own a gun, you can do it legally. Do it. We'd love to have the more the merrier. The more people who own guns and shoot them and enjoy them and value them, the more people who are there, the more supporters and protectors of gun rights that are going to be out there, and that's a good thing for everybody. Because as we've seen since 1992, as the number of civilian-owned firearms has doubled in this country. The violent crime rate has and stayed at an historic low. Until recently, despite what you heard from the gun control industry, we had a very peaceful country here with a huge number of firearms and very few people who use them criminally. Right. And a lot of defensive gun uses every year. So it turned out that an armed society truly is a polite society, and gun owners are among the most peaceful and most law-abiding cohort in the population. And things are changing a little bit now, which is why so many more people are choosing to become firearm owners.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dan, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I love your insight, love your content. I'm sure we'll be checking in as this stuff continues. But before we go, how about you just remind our audience where they could find out more about you and more about TTAG?
We are at thetruthaboutguns.com. We're on Twitter at GunTruth. We are on Instagram, I think, at GunTruth too, and The Truth About Guns on Facebook. And we welcome all comers.
Excellent. As always, we will have links to Dan's information as well as all the stuff about TTAG and the articles that were mentioned today in the blog post for this episode. So that'll be at faxonfirearms.com/blog. And you can check us out on all of your favorite podcasting apps as well. Dan, thank you so much for being on today.
Thanks for having me, sir.
All right. Thanks again for watching. As always, you can find more information about all of our guests, all of the episodes, and find an archive of all of our episodes at faxonfirearms.com/blog or on your favorite social media or podcasting app. We would love for you to hit that subscribe button, give a comment, refer a friend. We love growing this community. And also, we'd love to hear from you. Don't forget that you can now start giving your comments, questions, feedback, and even ideas for the podcast by emailing podcast@faxonfirearms.com. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next week.
We want to extend our deepest gratitude to military, police, first responders, and more by saying thank you with special pricing and discounts on all Faxon products. Here's how you get started. First, you'll head on over to our website, faxonfirearms.com. From there, you'll want to click Support and Guardian Purchase Program in the drop-down. Then you'll see the instructions on how to get started, so let's just walk through those. First, you'll want to register for an account on our website. If you've already bought something from us on our website before, then this part's already taken care of. Second, you'll want to send a copy of your credentials or some reasonable verification of affiliation to customer service at faxonfirearms.com. We get a lot of emails where people are like, hey, will this count? Will this ID count? Will this VA card count? Chances are, yes, a lot of them will count, but make sure you attach an image or a copy of that verification to the email before you even ask customer service. That way they can expedite the process for you. As soon as the account has been created or updated, we will send you an email letting you know that you're ready to go. The discount will be available anytime online when you go to your shopping cart. If you have any more questions, please email customer service at faxonfirearms.com.
Hi and welcome to the Faxon Blog and Podcast.